I hereby promise to do my best to talk about this game in a coherent and easy to understand way, and this retrospective won't turn into unintelligible squealing. With that out of the way, I freaking love this game. So, much like Final Fantasy II, this game was also released in a wonky order. The original Final Fantasy III in the West was actually Final Fantasy VI, the one with Terra and company. For this video, I am playing the 3D remaster of Final Fantasy III, the one on Steam, because it was one of the games of my childhood and thus the version I want to talk about. As I mentioned, I'm playing the Steam version for this video, however, the one I played as a kid was the DS. To start off, as usual, we need to talk about the opening movie. I absolutely adore the opening to FF3, and it remains my favorite in the series to this day. Nothing can top the exhilaration I feel when watching it. The music alone just takes me on this incredible journey that I absolutely adore. I love the glimpses we get into the characters from the movie. We see Luneth arguing with Ingus, showing the both of them to be very headstrong. Rafia is close with her chocobo, showing her caring side. We see Ark reading against a tree away from the other, showing how he's a bit more on the reserve side. My absolute favorite part in the animation is when Ingus shoves Luneth, and the look Luneth gets on his face is just like pure, unadulterated anger. And you can see that they don't get along too well, and it also indicates that it's at the beginning of the game because they're freelancers, which is the starting job. But then later on in the opening, when Luneth falls and he's about to die, Ingus saves him. He snatches him up, he keeps him from falling off the cliff because they're friends, they're brothers in arms, they're warriors of light, and I love that. My favorite part in the music is the crescendo as the four of them take on the behemoth, followed by the slow decrescendo as they move away from battle and are recovering. The music just takes the opening from great to fantastic, just with the way it syncs up with the animation, and I absolutely adore it. And enough about that, I guess we should actually start talking about the game. So our game starts off when a particularly nasty earthquake opens a giant hole in the altar cave and our hero Luneth falls down into it. There he meets the Wind Crystal and he is told of his destiny as a warrior of light, one of 4. Sound a little familiar? Yep, this bad boy definitely returns to the roots of Final Fantasy I a lot more than Final Fantasy II. In our hometown we meet Ark, the childhood friend of Luneth, who is a bit of a coward. Ark runs off to the cursed town Kazis, and there we find out that Castle Sassoon, along with the town, were cursed by a djinn. With the help of the blacksmith's daughter Rafia and one of the king's knights Ingus, we manage to break the curse and are acknowledged as the Warriors of Light. I'm just going to mention here that this game does the 4th party member thing from Final Fantasy II right, like they do it so well in this game. Princess Sarah joins our party for the fight against the djinn, but she isn't a character we need to actively build and then lose. She just acts as support and is there for plot and character development. And I will say this helped me form attachment to these extra characters a lot more than the 1 hour then death formula that Final Fantasy II was cooking. I really enjoyed that they took an enjoyable yet flawed system from Final Fantasy II, and they improved upon it and made it more enjoyable for Final Fantasy III. Anyways, with all 4 of us together, the Wind Crystal summons us back and sends us out into the world with the remainder of its light, our task to extract the light from the other crystals. Much like Final Fantasy I, this game follows a logical progression to which areas you can access. After defeating the djinn, we unlock the Mithril Ram, which gives us access to Cid's hometown, Canaan. We find out from Cid on our travels that the 4 of us are orphans and actually don't come from the floating continent we were raised on, but actually from the surface world. The next significant 4th party member we meet is Amnesiac Dest. He has some kind of important goal that he needs to do, but he can't remember what it is. Over the course of our travels, we're able to obtain a boat and gain more access to the world. The further we go, the more Dest remembers, until finally, at the climax of the dungeon, the Tower of Owen, he remembers that he is an ancient, tasked with the job of protecting the tower, the pillar that keeps the floating continent afloat. I bring Dest up in the most detail because he was my favorite extra party member. Due to the fact that you're able to chat with the extra party members throughout the journey and they have a bunch of different dialogue options, I was really invested in Dest's story. I wanted to know who he was and what his important task was. Not to mention, I loved the way he played off Rafia and Luneth. Those little 10-second conversations were something so small, but it made the game and the characters that much more memorable, and it remains a huge part of why I think the extra characters work better in this game versus in Final Fantasy II. Our journey continues and we're taken to some fantastical places. We meet dwarves and save their fire crystal, we save the Elder Tree from an evil skeleton king, and gain access to the Enterprise, a world's renowned airship. Then we learn officially that this small floating continent, all we've ever known all of our lives, is actually a small fraction of the world, a speck on a greater map. The The surface world is covered in darkness, and time has been stopped for 10 years, essentially since our heroes crashed down onto the floating continent with Sid. This part of the game is just so good. Just leaving the floating continent and queuing up like the Boundless Ocean theme and seeing just how vast and empty and dark the world was. It really just it takes it from this kind of fun, lighthearted journey that had been happening in the floating continent to something that needs to be taken a little bit more seriously. Then we meet Priestess Arya, and we learn of a way to save the surface. We need to extract the light from the water crystal. Once again, those extra conversations and how she plays off Lunith make Arya a better character. Her quiet determination despite her illness and injuries, that's really only shown in a few throwaway lines, makes me understand and care about her. So when she sacrifices her life to save us from the Kraken, Lunith yelling out for her, it makes me feel something. I didn't expect her to die, and even though I knew she would this playthrough around, I still felt sad knowing it would happen. I wish Arya could have seen the light return to the world she wanted so badly to protect and save. And that motivation, again, is just something that makes the characters a little bit more real to me. Before waking up, a mysterious person, who we later learn is Une, comes to us in our dreams and tells us to seek out someone named Doga on the Dal continent. After dealing with some Earth crystal shenanigans, we're able to regain access to our airship. When flying above a war-torn country, Saronia, our airship gets blown to bits. All that trouble just to have it get blown up, yay! With the help of Prince Alice, more on him later, we're able to root out the darkness causing the discourse in the country. As a boon for our services, we obtain the airship called the Nautilus, and thus gain access to Doga. From Doga, we're given a more clear picture as to who we're actually fighting. Essentially, a great wizard named Noah had 3 apprentices, Doga, Une, and Zand. When Noah passed, he bestowed a gift upon each of his pupils, the gift of advanced arcane knowledge to Doga, control over the world of dreams to Une, and the gift of mortality to Zand. Zand's all pissy because he has to live a stupid mortal life. And despite the fact that this isn't exactly a valid reason to end the world, I understand why he would be a little salty about receiving such a terrible gift, especially in comparison to what Doga and Une got. Damn, Noah clearly had some favorites happening. Anyways, with the help of Une, we're able to obtain the airship Invincible and gain access to the last crystal shard. We return to Doga's manor, and at the bottom learn that the only way to access Eureka, a forbidden land with the most powerful weapons imaginable, and the crystal tower, where Zand is, we need to destroy Doga and Une's bodies. This death didn't hit me as hard in the feels, mainly because this boss fight took me forever as a kid, so I was just happy they were gone. Finally, we gain access to the final area, the crystal tower, and I think this is where the game kind of lags. We have to climb through to the top of the tower, defeat Zand, watch a long, albeit very good, cutscene, travel to the world of darkness, defeat 4 more bosses, and then we're finally able to challenge the final boss. Oh, and if you die, there goes several hours of gameplay. We learn throughout the end that Zand flooded the 2 crystals on the surface world in darkness in order to stop time and gain immortality. In doing so, he loses control of himself and is essentially a puppet for the Cloud of Darkness, the big baddie. Cloud of Darkness causes the earthquake on our floating continent, which sets us on this journey in the first place. But only light is incapable of defeating the darkness because the central message of this game is balance between forces. So in order to truly defeat the Cloud, we need help from the legendary 1,000-year-old 4 Warriors of Dark. Despite the story being very interesting and the relationships we forge with our characters being very touching, when they revealed Desch hadn't actually died in the Tower of Owen, 8-year-old me was in hysterics because I was so happy. It's really hard to enjoy when you have to not only watch that part several times if you die several times, but you're also most likely quite frustrated when you get to it. The actual ending of the game, when you're returning all your friends home, is also quite touching and elicited several laughs out of me. But the whole 3-hour leading up to it were a stressful knuckle grip on the controller praying that I didn't get an unlucky back attack or mistimed particle beam that shot me right back to the beginning. It just sucks that a lot of people's last impression of Final Fantasy III will be the slow ending, and thus potentially leaving them with a negative impression when the rest of the game is really solid. So, I mentioned in one of these videos that I love characters more so than any other aspect in a game, and I think one thing Final Fantasy III does really well with its limited ability is express the characters. They're all orphans, so the whole found family thing they have going on is really cute, and I love seeing them grow together. I also love the letter system, or Mognet, the 3D remaster has, because it lets us keep in contact with our friends we've met throughout the game, and it helps them feel more fleshed out and connected to the journey, so when they appear later on, it feels less like an asshole. Ark starts off very timid and shy. When we first meet him, he's being bullied by 3 young boys about his cowardice. Despite that, he shows resolve by setting off on his own, desiring the ability to be stronger on his own without the help of Luneth. I'm talking about Ark specifically because I feel as though he has the most development as a character. Luneth, Rafia, and Ingus are all great, and the bonds they have with the other characters are all fantastic, but they also don't change that much as people from start to finish, besides maybe growing up a little. Ark and Alice are one of my favorite friendships in the game, second only to Dest and Luneth or Rafia, but that's again just because I am biased towards Dest. I love that Ark sees himself, or the beginning of the game Ark, in Alice. He sees himself as someone who wants to be brave but is unsure of how to go about that, and Ark essentially takes on the role that Luneth does for him, being the one to spur Alice onward and encourage him to save his kingdom. I think Ark really comes into his own here. He's grown. In the beginning of the game, Ark walks into Kazis saying he doesn't need anyone and that he's brave because he's not scared. But with Alice, we see a definitive shift in that mindset. Alice is afraid. He's afraid his dad doesn't love him anymore. He's afraid for his people. But he, and with him Ark, face him anyways. They're brave. And it's not because they weren't scared, it's because they were. But they chose to fight anyways, because they believed it was the right thing to do. I have a couple more things to point out about Ark, but so as to not bore anyone, I'll leave it here and just cap it off with Ark is best boy. So then we move on to Ingus. Ingus starts off very stiff and very formal. You can tell predominantly based on his language. The prime example for me would be the scene where they're all revealing that they're orphans. And Rafia's like, oh, I'm so glad that Taka raised me even though I'm an orphan. And then Luneth was like, oh yeah, like I'm an orphan too. And Ark was like, yeah, me too. And then Ingus is like, I too do not have parents. And I was just like, buddy bro, what are you saying? Nobody talks like that. However, despite that formality and stiffness, which makes sense given the way he was raised, you can also tell he is very much a protector. Outside of being directly told in his character description, we can see through his actions how much he cares about Princess Sarah. He feels a deep sense of responsibility over her well-being and feels terrible that he wasn't able to save her on his own. Unfortunately, due to the lack of focus on the characters, we never really see him develop beyond that. But I will say, Ingus is kind of the unloved child of my party. All of his equipment is hand-me-downs, and not to mention I never even gave him a specific job to master. He was a freelancer, then a red mage, then a geomancer, then a dragoon, then an evoker, then a ranger for a couple days. Oh yeah, then back to a geomancer, and then finally I capped him off as a ninja, and that was what he stayed as. But he was just always just a different job. I just could not decide on what I wanted him to be. I love his relationship with Sarah, especially because Sarah can be a real sassafras with him, especially in the ending. Like she gets kind of quippy with him. But I will say Ingus is definitely my least favorite of the four. So that leaves us with Rafia and Luneth. Luneth is the carefree, curious, trouble-seeking protagonist embodied. He's bold and impatient, and we see that even in simple things like the way he stands. When we leave him idle, he looks impatient just with the way he's, got one hand on his hip, he's like leaning over, he's like slouching, whatever. He kind of reminds me of how like Sonic will start looking at you and tapping his foot when he idles because he's getting upset with the player because he's idling. It's like the same vibe I get from Luneth. Rafia is similar in being carefree and adventure seeking, and the comic relief when needed. Unlike Ark and even Ingus, the two of them are quite stagnant. They end how they start. However, I think that actually plays well with Ark's timidness and Ingus's stiffness. They kind of meet them in the middle. And after all, balance is what we're going for. So as mentioned, Final Fantasy III is a lot closer to the original than Final Fantasy II. So we go back to using XP as our leveling up currency, and the turn-basedness stays the same. The big difference is the introduction of the job system. As we unlock more and more new areas, we also unlock new jobs. With the defeat of the Jinn, we unlock the starter 6. Say it with me if you remember them. Warrior, Thief, White Mage, Black Mage, Monk, and Red Mage. The job system gives you way more flexibility with how you play your characters and gives the game a bit more replay value. Unless you're like me and just play the same classes every single playthrough. I like the mages, okay? I like the mages. The game does try to force you into certain classes throughout certain points in the game. Like for example, you need a mage in your party to use Minnie and get into Tosis, and Toad to get into the Tower of Owen. But outside of those two examples, you don't need to follow what the game tells you to do. You don't necessarily need a scholar to fight Hein, a white mage works just fine. And you don't necessarily need a dragoon to fight Garuda either. I know on my first playthrough I just used a geomancer and I didn't have any dragoons, and it worked out okay. Essentially, the game gives you hints on what the easiest option is or a class for the particular goal, but generally you can do what you want. Another major difference is the lack of an MP number, and instead an amount of times you can use each level of spell. The combat is very solid in this game. It's fast-paced, enjoyable, and very customizable. The job system is one that I really enjoy, and I'm glad it comes back later in the series. Okay, it's music time, everyone's favorite part of the video. I dare you to try to find a bad track in this OST. The entire game is just banger after banger after banger. Like the overworld theme, the prelude, the battle theme, which is the first battle theme that comes into my mind when I think of classic Final Fantasy. The Boundless Ocean, which again is haunting, beautiful, and a mainstay in my regalia in Final Fantasy 15. Aria's theme is lovely, and honestly, the entire soundtrack during the 3-hour grind fest, that from the darkness that is the end of the game, is almost good enough to save the ending. Not quite, but it almost is there. So yeah, like I love the music in this game. It's probably, I'm not gonna say it's my favorite one because that would be probably a lie, but it is up there. So another thing I really enjoyed in this game was the amount of like extra side questy stuff you could commit yourself to if you wanted to. As I mentioned, there was the letter system, which was the Mognet, and that actually gives you access to 3 kind of main side quests. So from Topapa, we get the Save the Children quest, where we unlock the Onion Knight ability, the Onion Knight job class, which is a reference to the original Final Fantasy III that had, instead of starting as a freelancer, you started as an Onion Knight. Sarah, Taka, and Sid give you the ability to meet the legendary smith, who can make you the Ultima weapon, as well as like other equipment for different jobs. And then the 4 Old Men and Alice give you access to a new dungeon and the strongest boss in the game, the Iron Giant. That was the only quest I didn't finish in this game because my Lunith at the end of the game was at level 95, his like job level, and I was not going to grind those last 4 levels. I didn't have it in me. Anyways, there's also Eureka, the Forbidden Land, which has the 6 ancient weapons that you can fight bosses for. And then there's 3 extra summons you can also obtain, Leviathan, Odin, and Bahamut. So there was like a lot of extra things you could commit yourself to. I got the extra summons just for clout. However, I will say it's kind of pointless if you're not planning on using a summoner. Like my party, I didn't use a summoner in my party. So it was like, cool, I have these now, but I'm not going to use them. But yeah, I really enjoyed the amount of extra content you commit yourself to, even post-game. Random thoughts I had while playing the game. When you enter the floating continent from different sides from the surface world, you actually land on the side you entered on. I thought that was small, but really cool. I expected to just end up just at one given point, regardless of where you entered, so it was very immersive that happened. My Ingus was getting absolutely destroyed this run. Every monster targeted him. He was always dead, just perpetually. I wish I had the footage of the first time I attempted the Darkness realm, because I defeated all 4 bosses, but Ingus was dead, and like the only one dead at the end of all 4 of them. So like by the time I got to the Cloud of Darkness, he was like 3 or 4 levels below everyone else. It was so embarrassing. For some reason, everyone kept calling us Warriors of the Light, and I don't remember the ever being in there. I always thought it was just Warriors of Light. And I'm not gonna lie, the extra the gives me the same vibes as when Zack says, as a soldier in the Final Fantasy VII remake. It's technically the same, like it's the same as soldier. It's the same, it means the same thing, but it's just, it hits different with that extra word in there. It just hits different. I saw the blood sword when I got to the Earth Crystal dungeon place. I forget the name of the guy. I think it was Golder's Manor or something. And I got really excited because I remember the absolute god-killing power it had in Final Fantasy II. And I was like, whoa! And then it wasn't as good. It was actually kind of bad. So I was kind of disappointed. I like the fact that, again, we still are learning more about our characters, like our extra characters, even after they're no longer relevant. Like in Saronia, there's a book about like this ancient scientist guy who's like experimenting on something, and he says that he's gonna bring his son Dest with him to go do all these, to run all these experiments and do all this learning. And I like that because they teased that Dest was an ancient, that he wasn't from the floating continent and everything, and then they kind of showed it later on, and it's just like, oh my god, Dest, you're still relevant, oh my god. Yeah, I love him. The switch between the Nautilus airship and the Invincible airship is painful. The Nautilus is so fast, it just like goes, it zips along, gets you where you need to go, and the Invincible is just like chugging along, and it takes forever, and it's painful. I really like the consistencies across jobs for like little accessories. The person I noticed it in first was Ingus, and then I was looking through all the jobs in like the art, and I noticed that Ark has it as well. But Ingus has like a green pendant he wears in his freelancer form, and that green pendant actually appears in over half of his jobs where he's still wearing it. And then Ark has his yellow scarf that he wears, and like same thing. They keep that consistent throughout some of the jobs. Like he'll be wearing it, and I thought that was really cool because it was just like something little, and it's like, oh, maybe it has sentimental value, and you're free to kind of play with it and think about it. And I just thought that was really cool. In conclusion, in case it wasn't evident by all the talking I did about this game, I love it. I love this game. I love our heroes. I love the story. It's simple yet powerful. I love the combat and just about everything this game has to offer. The only thing that really brings this game down is just how much that ending lags. And I will say it's a real shame. If you haven't played Final Fantasy before and older style games are more up your alley, I definitely would recommend giving this one a try because it's actually very, very solid.